Freud lives. He lives in the form of these Freudian creeps in the fields of psychotherapy and psychology. Really interesting piece about the cult of trauma and how it's taken over the mental health fields by Alastair Mordey at The Spectator. And he gives us a history that I suspect most people don't know about how we got to this point of the mental health community, mental health professionals sticking with debunked Freudian theories in the interest of politics, the politicization of something else, mental health professionals who tend to children that ostensibly have mental health needs, and the impact of the politicization of these fields. For more on this, pleased to be joined by the aforementioned Alastair Mordey. He's an addiction specialist, addiction treatment professional based in northern Thailand. Alastair Mordey, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So, walk us through the recent history here, and we can fast forward through Freud, although certainly his dubious theories that persist to this day should be addressed. But I'm particularly interested in what seems to be a watershed moment, this adverse childhood experiences study in the 1990s. The floor is yours.
That's right, Dan. I mean, psychology has always been quite obviously a left-leaning field, a bit like education. I think probably your listeners are probably quite aware of how education has been wokified, if you want to use that word, the last 10 or 15 years. But psychology and psychotherapy and counseling is very much the same. And it goes back a lot further than, obviously, the last 10 years we've become aware of this, but actually its roots go back to the 1990s. And in the 1990s, there were a series of moves by psychiatrists and clinical psychologists to kind of water down trauma definitions, if you want to call it that, or kind of make adversity pathological. So, and, lo and behold, 25, 30 years later, here we are. And adversity has been pathologized. So, our kids, we might want to bring them up and expose them to a certain amount of rough and tumble, or students at university who might, be expected to hear opposing points of view. This is no longer accepted. Everybody knows this, but the reason for it is that in the 1990s, psychology and education and other fields took a Freudian turn, if you like, and just started to assume that everybody had hidden trauma. It really is quite bizarre that at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, the psychology field would actually start to dig deeper into Freud rather than become more modern and more evidence-based, and that's where we are today.
Well, and so the theories, the Freudian theories that are prevalent and that are punctuated by this ACE study that I'm mentioning, describe those, if you will, so that we can talk about the impacts of their prevalence.
Yeah, so the researchers sort of collated 10 archetypal experiences that are supposed to be a sign of an adverse childhood. So those were emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, emotional and physical neglect, and then 5 types of household dysfunction, which are common adversities, like there's a parent in prison, or a parent who your parents have separated, growing up in a home where somebody was mentally unwell, and somebody's incarcerated. These types of, I wouldn't say common childhood adversities, but on the face of it, these sound like quite bad things. But as I said in the Spectator article, actually, when you get down to the wording of the original study, it was extremely subjective. So it was very open-ended. It was a quantitative study, not qualitative. So yes or no answers. So if you answered, for example, yes, I was pushed several times in my childhood by a parent, then you'd go into the same category as somebody who was beaten up by a brutal stepfather. So it's incredibly wide-ranging, vague, and subjective. And I mean, I could easily answer probably affirmatively 7 of those 10 adversities, and I don't consider myself to have had a particularly unpleasant childhood. So the question is, are these things really adversities at all? And as time went on, they also got conflated with trauma. So those two words started to become almost interchangeable in psychology, adversity and trauma. So now we're in the position where a lot of people undergoing psychotherapy are being exposed to this kind of ACE awareness in psychologies, if you like, and convinced that they have had especially adverse experiences in childhood or even traumatic childhoods, when frankly they've had really quite normal childhoods.
Well, I mean, I think everyone's home family in some form or shape is dysfunctional, but now people are being traumatized, or they say by words, by somebody using the wrong pronouns. And how does that fit into society?
Right. Well, I mean, young people in particular have been primed for this. So, I mean, we've heard a lot about how this has happened in the educational field and in universities, but the other untold story, if you like, is that this has been the case in mental health as well. And of course, a lot of young people access mental health services that aren't psychotically ill. You know, they might be anxious or depressed. It might be at university. It might be a student counselor. And let's say they go with a fairly ordinary complaint. They're stressed with their exams. They're anxious because they're away from home. And what we have now is a whole an armada of clinical psychologists and counselors and psychotherapists who are wielding this trauma diagnosis around very, very wildly. And young people are sort of being indoctrinated with the idea that they're traumatized. And I mean, I've worked in addiction treatment for 20 years, and I can tell you it's gone from a very abstinence-orientated 12-step perspective, which was really like, you are the problem. This is what we were told when we first got into recovery. You are the problem. I am the problem. I need to take personal accountability for my problems. I have sat and watched that change over 15 or 20 years to almost the polar opposite, where addiction treatment is all about unearthing hidden childhood traumas that frankly most of the time don't even exist. And you can well imagine how that does not sit well with a quest for personal accountability. Those two things are mutually exclusive oftentimes.
And so the motivation, if you wanted to hazard a guess as to the motivation of this move to, as you say, make adversity pathological. That's a good phrase. To cast more and more kids as victims and sort of imprint that upon them at an early age. What's motivating that? Not to mention, by the way, the adoption of Freud's creepy theories about childhood sexual appetites.
Right. Well, a lot of commentators would give these, let's call them Freudian Marxist motivated psychology movement, if you like. This turn to trauma in psychology is really Freud meets Marx. It's a little bit different to what you see, for example, in extreme trans rights activists and the university deplatforming movements, in that those are clearly culturally Marxist. But you're quite right, and I mentioned it in the article, that in psychology, of course, Freud is always hovering around. And Freud fits really well with Marx in this way, because Freud was obsessed with childhood trauma. He was obsessed with sexual abuse. And initially, he believed that all of his clients had been sexually abused, which is quite mad if you think about it. It's really mad. And he quite quickly realized that wasn't the case, and he couldn't substantiate any of these stories about childhood sexual abuse. I mean, certainly a fraction of his clients probably were sexually abused, but certainly not the majority. So he gave up on that and then invented another theory, which people know well and which he often gets lampooned for, which is that children have sexual feelings, which is a pretty disturbing idea if you think about it. Well, those two ideas are still alive and well in the psychology profession, particularly in the psychotherapy field. and sort of couched in Marxist and social justice terms along the lines of, you have hidden childhood trauma. We, the psychotherapists, will root out your hidden childhood trauma. What caused your childhood trauma has changed slightly because mother bashing isn't really fashionable anymore. So it's changed to society oppresses you. So society has damaged you and you don't know it. It's hidden trauma. Let us, the magical psychotherapists, unearth this hidden trauma for you and heal you. And you should know that it's external people, places, and institutions that are the problem, not you. Now,
including your parents.
Including your parents, but even probably more so, oppressive society, institutions, authority, basically, because there is so to answer Amy's original question, where's it coming from? A lot of commentators are, like Jonathan Haidt, psychologist, are quite, give them the benefit of the doubt and say this is just a well-meaning but a bad idea. I'm not so sure. I think it does have a malign agenda behind it. I think it's driven by segments of society that are anti-authoritarian and to some extent would like to cause a bit of chaos. And I'm not I would not offer the benefit of doubt in all cases. It seems to me to be causing so much trouble. The idea of convincing young people that they are terribly fragile is so potentially disastrous that I don't know how it can have a good intention behind it.
Well,
that's all I would say. It just seems to me like anarchism.
Yeah, and then building upon that, then you have these school counselors and so on and so forth that are part of the administrative authority. How ironic, that are pushing this agenda to sexualize kids at a young age. Seems to me that this is more of an effort afoot to separate children from their parents, and since they're traumatized victims, here is the cure. The cure is to embrace your sexuality, is to adopt this identity. Come over here and you'll be celebrated and loved and healed, if you will.
Right. Well, yes. I mean, it comes down to this. Sometimes when you want to ask yourself, why is somebody doing something that looks so crazy? You have to consider the possibility that the end result of what they're doing is actually what they want, right? Which is quite a radical idea. So if you think, if you looked at the end result of a lot of this, essentially what is corrupting of the youth, right? If you look at that and say, well, yes, that is the end result. What if the people that were trying to bring that about, that was their actual intention? So an example I would give of how this isn't that unbelievable is the great writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So if you read Gulag Archipelago, and this man is a great man and a highly intelligent man, and a war hero and a dissident and so on. And he said that as the Soviet Empire was starting to collapse, he and his fellow prisoners in the Gulag system started to hear rumors that America might send a nuclear bomb. And they cheered because they were in such a terrible position in their society, or they felt like they were such losers that they wanted to burn it down. And that's an intelligent and fair-minded man. So I think when people feel like they want to burn things down, they will do things that are counterintuitive and dangerous to their own society. And I think that that's what's going on. I don't give a lot of these actors with the benefit of the doubt and think they really think they're doing good. I'm not so sure about that. I wonder if they have their own problems and they're just trying to burn it all down.
What is your opinion on gender reassignment surgery for minors?
Well, I think I follow Jordan Peterson, clinical psychologist, on that. I think it's abuse, and I think that justice will eventually be done. I mean, you're seeing it change very rapidly, right, across Scandinavia. The laws being passed to protect kids. I think people realize this is a travesty, and certain states in America obviously are getting up to speed on it. But there is a movement across Europe to backpedal fast on this, because and the only question remains: how did it get this far? How did it get this bad? And the answer is the 1990s, right back to where we began with this conversation, the radicalization of the university system. In a sense, it was an even more radical version of the 60s because the students of the 1960s became the establishment. And now we've had almost two generations of that uber-liberal progressive establishment bringing in its reality. And now we are here.
He is Alastair Mordey, addiction treatment professional based in northern Thailand. Alastair, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Structural foundation problems? Permaseal can help. Hi, I'm Roy Spencer, president of Permaseal. Last year's severe drought has homeowners across Chicagoland and Northwest Indiana experiencing symptoms of structural foundation issues. Cracked brickwork or caulking, uneven floors, new cracks in the drywall or ceiling, doors or windows that no longer open or shut properly, or basement walls